Should we start?
Let's start. The castle wanted us to pay £21,000.
But how many of them have got the X factor that's going to make me want to pick up the phone and go, I don't know, at the minute, I can't think of too many.
I caught a carp full of spawn bound. I don't think there's many people that would, if say it was £48, it should have been 41. You would still count that.
I could tell from watching it, you thought this isn't going to work.
I said to him from the minute we got there, you're going to get done on that.
Does that mean the solid PVA bag as a principle is entirely flawed?
If you could, they'd probably have a spinner rig in their bag, wouldn't they? Arthur was seen on my spot. You just had to take every single thing into account there, you know.
I'm going to shout out the godfather of carp fishing.
Is a lake home to a carp that has been 1 ounce off the British record. I would argue with anyone that a longer rig is better than a shorter rig. Welcome to the Cypography podcast. In this episode, we discuss a manner of things with the two main focuses being record-breaking carp and our underwater adventures with Oscar Thornton. As a thank you to all of you that are listening or watching, we are offering 50% off your first month's Cypography membership, and to redeem this, use the code podcast when subscribing via our website, where you will find thousands of videos and other podcasts just like this one.
Should we start?
Let's start.
Right, non-chronological. As we record, you've just come back from Waterside.
Yes.
What was that like? Without giving anything away, because we'll see it at some point.
I thought it was really good. What did you think?
Yeah, I agree. And actually, the giving away thing, I don't think so. I mean, we put stuff on the story. Like, people can get the gist. I think that's kind of important these days. So, yeah, I think you should probably explain why we were at Waterside at all, because it's kind of the crux of it, really. It's going to be ongoing, isn't it? So
yeah, so we went to Waterside first time around with W and Spoon. And for anyone that doesn't know, Waterside is a lake home to a carp that has been 1 ounce off the British record. So a very, very, very big carp, but also an accessible carp because it's run as a bookings venue. So you book the venue, you go down there with your friends. Some people book it alone, apparently. And we sort, yeah.
That'd be
the wise men book it alone.
You'd book that for yourself, wouldn't you?
I bloody well would, yeah. So we went there with Dub and Spoon the first time around. Obviously, it's an incredible place to go. It's an incredible opportunity to have, and you know, it's what a carp to catch, or at least try to catch. So we went there first time around with Dub and Spooner. I think, was it last year or the year before?
No, it was last March, the first week of March last year.
Okay.
And it was among the most challenging shoots I've ever been on. It's probably will remain the worst shoot I've ever been on, actually.
For what reasons?
The weather. Don't know if you remember what well, you probably don't. The beginning of March 23 was sideways sleet. Like, it was so cold, mate.
And snow.
Sleet, snow, rain, everything. The whole works. Freezing cold. We stayed on an extra night as well. I think we might have done 4 nights again, or 4 or 5.
Yeah.
But it kind of gives you a glimpse into the sort of gravity of the situation when people are willing to stay in those conditions because it takes one bite. And the fish wasn't as big then.
I think it'd been 60. I want to say it'd been 64-ish. It wasn't touching the record. You know, there's been carp that have been 63, 60, there are still now, but since that first time it has quite literally come as close as you can come to breaking the British record. Really cool story behind the fish. Just it's a really weird place to go because it's only a small lake. The carp is catchable, although it pretty much never comes out throughout the winter months, which is quite interesting. I think there's a greater chance of that happening now that more people are fishing it this winter. I think Chris said the other day, Terry Hearn's fishing it this winter, Lewis Reed's fishing it, Dave Levy's fishing it,
Steve Briggs
is fishing it. So it's getting more and more attention, as you would imagine. But we went there, like I say, first time around. I then went back in March. We were supposed to go with Dovey again. He was like, I'm not coming. It was too cold. It was freezing. I think -5s and that sort of... You know those March days you get where it really is cold? I did 4 nights, didn't catch anything. Saw fish. We were then returned with Ollie and Nick.
That was about 6 weeks ago. So probably really nice early autumn. And we saw the fish. We saw him. Him. We saw him. It's mad to think of it as a hymn because when you see it, it's so wide that you immediately think of it's carrying, eggs, but it isn't. With Ollie and Nick, and that the highlight for me was seeing that fish. Ollie called me over. He was like, Rich, come out, come. And I put the camera down, ran over, stood on the boat, on top of an upturned boat, as it was just sort of waddling in under a bush. And I think once you've seen it, it does add a different drama to being there, because otherwise it feels like there's a bit of a disconnect. You feel like you're at a lake where you haven't seen the main prize. It almost feels like it may as well be a mythological, but
and Ollie has history with that fish.
That's right. Ollie's caught it twice before, albeit from a different lake, the little lake next door. I think it's Heron, is it? Yeah, Heron Lake next door, which we've also filmed on in the past. And it was moved after Ollie's second capture, not by Ollie, I hasten to add, but somebody else moved it into the bigger lake, Kingfisher, and it's just gone mental.
I mean, Ollie had it at mid-30s, upper 30s?
I thought 35 to 37, that sort of size.
Maybe
it's had...
I think it was 34.
Was it? Maybe it had
and 32 or something.
And it's basically almost doubled in weight since.
Yeah, I mean, just for a bit of we are going to cover quite a lot of detail about this lake in the shoot, in this ongoing project. But these are two former rough and ready little pits in the Chess Valley, which is a chalk stream in Buckinghamshire, I think. He's sort of nestled in the Chilterns. It's pretty unique. I wouldn't say it's to everyone's taste. Chris, who runs the lake, it's very, very manicured now, but it sits within quite a unique little environment. It's part of a chain of lakes. The water quality is obviously excellent. It's full of crays. We saw all sizes of crays, so presumably that can have maybe the big one eats them. I don't know.
I bet he has his share.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that, again, within fishing, because there's no money put into it, nobody really researches things, you're just left imagining what a roll crays might play in their diet, because we just don't know, do we? I think people hear about them passing.
You see it abroad all the time.
Do you think they actively hunt crays though?
100%. I think there's a deshelling phase that obviously you have the young crays, which is a big thing. I think most people that have fished a lake with crays in will talk about these periods where the lake does seem to just quieten down, and I think that a lot of the time you'll hear the crays are. I think they go dormant for a little while. They
hide.
They disappear for a bit,
hide.
But then when they come back, that's when the fishing gets hard, because the carp are eating them as you would expect. They're if you ever look at a crayfish, there's a lot of food there in one mouthful, one big mouthful, and they're more than capable, I think, of chomping them up. And
I think they're fast, but they like to hide in the rocks and stuff. So I think those little ones will get sucked up quite easily.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether they all molt at once. I don't imagine they do, maybe there's always crays available that have molted, because obviously in order to grow they need to shed the harder carapace and then harden up and grow again. And the other thing that I think about the cray lakes, which is really interesting, again not well understood, is the role of the larvae, which are like tiny shrimp that are free swimming. And, when they're first hatched, they swim around in huge clouds. And I don't even know that many people have seen that.
They must be predated on by everything, the smallest of fish.
They're much bigger than normal zooplankton, from what I've seen. And then they'll settle out in the weed and they'll harden up and stuff. So who knows? I mean, there are plenty of fish that act like these freaks, like James, the fish down this way in Essex, that Lord of the Manor.
Some just seem to have this thing about them. I guess it's the same with anything. If you look at humans right through all species of animals across the world, there'll be certain ones that just get bigger, grow faster.
It's the pace of growth, isn't it? Are we seeing that more?
Aren't they?
I think, but I was just thinking to myself then, it feels like it's happening more. These freaks are...
I mean, in this last week, as we're recording, we've seen 360s, have we? That reported certainly in the last week or so. Darryl Peck's had one of them. There's that harrow fish that's a VS fish. I mean, all of those,
and 14 years old, I think.
Yeah.
I think if you look to other parts of the world, though, the fish they get bigger everywhere. Like I'm sure 60, 70 pounders in Europe were big at deemed to be really big fish at one stage. They're not now. 60, 70 pounders in Europe are not
mid-70s was world record, wasn't it? When I was growing up, anyway.
Or they're big fish, sorry, but they're not giants like they make. So I guess everything with time bait, food, climate change. It must all have its effect. But we were having this conversation, as Rich said the other day. You can't actually. It feels like the 60-pounders they sort of appear a bit now as well.
Yeah, almost like
they just appear at 60. And like
we should have known about 60s for 10 or 15 years.
Like the last few 60-pounders I've seen have all been fish that I wasn't actually aware of until I saw them at £60. And you think, well, how on earth? Where was that at 57? Where was it at 58? Because you would think, especially nowadays with how available everything is, so they're either being kept under wraps for good reason, so that the people that are fishing for them get to fish them without them becoming too desirable from everyone else. But they do just seem to pop up. Oh, there's a 60-pounder, like Rich said. There's in the last few weeks alone, there's been several caught. A couple of years ago, these fish weren't as well known though, and you were seeing them for the first time.
I think for me, listening to you talk like that though, the significance perhaps isn't what has gone, but it's what's yet to come, because we now know these fish and they're going to be around for another 20 or 30 years in some cases. These are going to, I think one of these ones will obliterate the British record. I don't even think we're talking about it being close. They're close now and they're young.
Yeah, I don't
Certainly
know if that's
in the
a
case
cause
of
for
the
concern or not, though. I always feel a fish that gets big young, there's always a bit of doubt in my mind whether it will will sustain that weight growth and things like that. I mean, it is too early to tell, but generally you feel like a fish that's going to live long doesn't do that kind of thing. And James's, for example, near me, that was a carp that just rocketed to £40. Absolutely rocketed to £40. There's probably been other
6
other
years,
fish
wasn't
that
it?
something
£40
like that,
at 6 years old,
from £5 to £40 in 6 years. And I wouldn't mind betting there's other fish that have done that now. I think it's all, again, everything's relative to the time things are happening. But that fish it didn't carry on doing that. It did it, and it's dead now,
I'll tell you what's crucial to me, though. None of these fish have been fed to that size.
No.
Which, in the eyes of the British Record Fish Committee, they may not be relevant anymore. Who knows? I hope they remain relevant. But they all these fish would qualify, I think. I don't think any of them is stocked big.
The official British record is still Dean Fletcher's Capture the Parrot, which seems an eternity ago in the whole landscape of carp fishing. Have people in that time, nearly 10 years maybe, 2016, I don't know, something like that, in that time, have we completely forgotten about the official British record? Have you just got, in your head, do you think, well, it's any fish that isn't from home fen, or it might be that Wingham Freak 83? Do we all have our own personal British record now? I don't know.
I think I actually go by, in my head, I always go, I know what the official record is, which is the official record, isn't it, for a reason? But it's the 83 that I always think, well, do you know what, really? That is, if it had been claimed, I know it's ridiculous and it was full of spawn, but a lot of previous British records were spawn-bound carp. I think it would be a shame if that had been accepted as a British record, because although I don't think there's any doubt on whether it should have been a record, the fact it would £83 would have put such a barrier between the current that it would probably never get broken again. So I like the fact that the guy who caught it didn't claim it, because he thought, well, this is so spawn bound, it's pumped full of water, and is just a totally absurd size to claim it. But he had every right to claim it, as many anglers. If I caught a carp full of spawn bound, I don't think there's many people that would, if say it was £48, it should have been 41. You would still count that as £48. I think he took a different approach to it, and I see the reasoning behind it. Part of me is glad he did. I also would have kind of took satisfaction in the fact that it would have been a legitimate record that wouldn't be so easily beaten by the likes of home fen, and it would have put those questions to bed at times. But I do like the fact that the parrot remains the record despite that capture. But for me, the parrot and they're the two fish that are in the mix for that.
I think I'm sort of with Al to a degree, in that yes, maybe the Wingham fish should have counted. You could make that case, but now that it doesn't, it's more exciting, because I think that there are fish that could do the record. You know, we were in danger of not seeing a record for a long time otherwise, I think, because there are people trying to grow British records, let's not beat about the bush, and they haven't been able to a degree, or certainly to a degree to grow a British record that satisfies people that it's been done legit anyway.
Yeah, legitimate, unquestioned British record is on the cards at the moment with these fish. No one will question it. And
No,
I think that's good. It's a
do
good thing.
Do you know what? I feel like you might know this, Tom, because I don't. That they knocked fish back because they were put in at a certain percentage size of the British record. So even if it would actually impact, so let's say a Priory or a VS that went in at £29, I don't think they would count.
My recollection, and I was on the Angling Times at the time when the home fen sort of fish came about, my recollection, and I might be wrong, is there was never a percentage stipulated. It was just sort of assumed by anglers sort of looking at the statement that came from the BRFC, and they said, they were reading between the lines and thought, well, I think they left it deliberately quite ambiguous, that it's gone in at a big weight. It is a large fish already, and then it was the feeding on that they didn't like.
I thought it was something to do with how long they were fed for.
I don't think they ever, I don't think there's if it's been in for 10 years, it's fine. If it's been in for 9 months, 9 years, 11 months, it's not fine. I don't think they ever created parameters. And in some ways, maybe that created trouble further down the line. But
I just think probably the sad reality is that we're moving closer to a moment when it's unmanageable. And all of these things seem a little bit arbitrary. and ultimately, you just go fishing for what you want to fish for, and that's that. Which it seems to be the way the scene is going. But it's quite nice that the British record does still seem to mean something, and I think one of these fish will wash it away soon.
Yeah, I mean, what's happened in the catfish record is they abolished the catfish record, but now they're bringing back. Now you can submit a claim for a British record catfish. So there's almost been a period of it has gone bonkers. We don't know where these fish have come from. Maybe we've had that in carp fishing sort of unofficially, and now we're on the cusp of an era where legitimate fish that cannot be questioned are back on the table, and we're looking at them.
I think it's in the hands of, it sounds like it is in the hands of people who are capable of taking a look at the situation, looking at the carp in question, and making a sensible decision around it. They're obviously, the record would have been broken by now if the wrong, I will say, the wrong people were in charge. But they've obviously got enough, going on where they can go, no, that fish is worthy, that fish isn't, that's legitimate, that's not. And I think that's good. I think, the record stands, it lives on, it's still an obtainable thing. You can still be a British record holder with a carp that no one is going to question. And we could easily be in a place where you can be a British record with a carp that a massive percentage of people really do question the legitimacy of it.
And at that point, that's when it starts to slide.
Yeah.
Because if you've got 50% of the angling community unable to accept a record, then the record's not worth anything. I don't think you need some kind of majority behind. But I as a matter of, certainly as a side point, I think that Waterside fish, out of all the ones we've just mentioned, will probably do it next year.
I'll tell you what, I said to Chris actually about this,
This is the owner, yeah.
Sorry, Chris, who runs Waterside. I said to him before we left, and I didn't really think about it at the time, but he does not let you take that fish out of the water. If you catch that carp, you do not remove it from the water. It says here on a big sign in the rule, and I'm sure he tells everyone when you get there as well. If you catch that carp, it doesn't come out of the water until he's there. In fact, it doesn't come out of the water when he is there. Everything is done in the water. And actually, with a carp of that size, that will give that fish longevity. There's no doubt about it, because let's face it, that's a big carp. Most people that catch that carp have never held a carp of that size. Lots of people who go fishing will never hold a carp of that size, especially in this country. So the fact he's made that decision, when you're fishing there, you think, I wish we could. It feels a bit of it feels like a little bit of a hindrance that you can't, because you naturally always would. But when you look at it from his side, and particularly for the welfare of that carp, it's a really good decision to make. And as Rich says, I think if there is going to be a carp to do it, it's nearly done it already. I can't see anything, provided touch wood, everything's fine with the carp and it lives long. That will be the next one, I think, to do it.
Is there a blueprint for catching that carp? The anglers that you've been down there with, are they following a set pattern that it goes certain places, that it eats certain baits?
Yeah, and I'm not going to say what they are because we do plan to keep going there, and it's expensive to go there. So we went there. We've just been there. It came out 4 days before we got there, and you just think, it was so close. So but yes, that is a targetable carp, and I love that about it because you're only. I speak for myself, maybe by saying, but I'm only going to Waterside for that carp. Like that's what makes me want to go there. There's loads of places I can go carp fishing, but if I go to Waterside, there's one carp on my mind, and to know that it is targetable, it is catchable. I love that because if you think about it enough, it's love. I've always enjoyed fishing for a carp where I can look back at previous captures. I find that fun. Carp that I've fished for where there's just no pattern, there's no rhyme or reason to anything they do. They can be quite tedious campaigns at times. You end up catching loads of carp and never feeling particularly close and things like that. But that fish, there's certain things you can do, places you can put yourself where, you sit behind the rods, you look out, and I look out. I said it all the time. I keep saying to myself, he's out there, and I believe he is a lot of the time because it is a carp that has those patterns. Of course, it gets caught around the lake, and you can get it wrong very easily, I'm sure, but it's a targetable fish. It's a legitimately humongous fish, and it's a really exciting place to go.
Just for the record, 66.5 pounds the week before last, or whatever it was. Apparently, that's unprecedented for this time of year for that fish. It's a huge early autumn weight. So come March, I think it's comfortably over 68 pounds.
It wears it well as well, doesn't it?
It's a male, Tom. So yeah, it's a lot of muscle mass, I think. It's
funny as well because it comes out
Doesn't look
66
fragile.
and they're like, it's down in it's down in weight, and you're like, I talk to Tom and he's like, mate, I keep saying, he's like, this is a big carp. When you say this is a big carp, you're like, no, it isn't a big carp. This is so much beyond being a big carp. This is as big a carp that has ever swam in this country. Yes, it's a big carp, but you're doing a massive injustice by calling it a big carp because it's so much more than that.
Yeah, it feels when you actually allow yourself to imagine. I mean, you must have, because I fished the last night, but you've fished quite a few nights. When you imagine what it would feel like to flick the head torch on and be met by...
I just think you're going to know. You're going to know. I think you're going to know.
It's like a sandbag.
Yeah, man.
Is it a known scrapper?
No, the opposite, which is why it's mint, Tom.
Yeah. And I believe one of us will catch that. We've like I say, we've done 4 trips now. 2 in March when it was absolutely freezing. We've actually just booked another trip for March, but the end of it, thank God. They were diabolical, just with the weather. March can be so hit or miss, and we got the miss side rather than the hit side of that. But the previous 2 we've been there at times where that it's in the game. And even in March, I've managed to find like enthusiasm in it. You got to keep telling yourself you're going to catch it. And I do think if we can keep visiting the place, I think one of us will catch it in the end. But we have to get our bookings right.
And it will come out, and it probably will be a British record for somebody else, which is fine. It's an accessible British record. It's not behind an exclusive syndicate, which again is kind of rare, Tom. I think in the history of the British record, to just be able to turn up and book it. In fact, I think it's probably the first time.
And the one that Daryl's just caught, that's the same, isn't it?
The Manor.
Book that. It's crazy to think.
Yeah, he booked it himself, didn't he? He did it.
It's
he
crazy
did what
to
you'd
think
do.
that those carp can be
Just be fished for.
And don't get me wrong, it's not the same. It's not the same as a carp that you put weak and I think catching it would. Yes, it would be incredible in lots of ways. It will never be the same as catching a 40-pounder you spent 3 years trying to catch.
And equally, nobody knows if the Burfield Common could be up that sort of in that kind of ballpark of weight in the spring, because it just doesn't come out in the spring.
And there's other carp, isn't there, that could be knocking. You just don't know. But there is, like I say, I'm sure it's not for everyone. And really, like when I look back, at times you think, I don't want to book a lake and try and come, but you do when you go there. And you're actually fishing for it, it's great. And when you have to leave, it's horrible.
Especially if you're reeling off bubblers, Al.
Yeah, like so the trip we've just done, I blanked for first 3 days, carp all over me, fishing where I know that fish really does most of its captures, really. And on the last night into the morning, they'd been just terrorising the weed all around me, fizzing up, couldn't catch them for love nor money. Me and Dovey were at that end, essentially just caught nothing for days with fish all over us. And I had to reel in the last morning, having just caught one with fish just bubbling all over my spot. And I don't doubt for a second that, it'd just been caught, yes, but it does get caught in quick succession, that fish. And I don't doubt for a second he was up the end. And I remember just thinking, if I had another few days just to try and build on this, because the way I was fishing in a way that you could build on that. I wasn't just chucking a PVA bag here, I was baiting. They were on my bait. And I left my rods out to the very, very last second. And it was horrible. It was horrible having to really, knowing that you can't go back until March next year. It's quite a surreal way to fish.
Yeah, it's unlike a day ticket or a club venue where you can
just go back.
Yeah, you can bait up and come back the next.
I couldn't ring Gemma and say, babe, I'm not coming home today, or probably the next day or the next day. I've got to stay here. You couldn't do that. You couldn't pull those. And you just have to go. And then someone else turns up and you think, will it be them? When it could have been us? You're like, so yeah, it's different, but it's exciting.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
So on this trip, you had multiple anglers. It sounds like both of you got the rods out. Who had the underwater cameras, or did you not take the underwater cameras?
No. So as previously mentioned, we will still continue to make other types of films. And this is one of them. So this is another ongoing series that we will carry on with. And the basic plan is book the lake and get a variety of different anglers to come and fish. So in each film, who knows who you could have. And like I say, we've done 4 trips now.
Yeah, so you currently on that, you've got Dovey, you've got you've got Tom Stokes, you've got Nick Hellier, and you've got Ollie Davis. So, I think we're probably the only people that are putting together that kind of thing with cross-pollination of brands, because that's the one slight limitation that these big brands have is that they don't get to do that. So when we do, it's fun. So yeah.
Yes.
And is it interesting to see how those different anglers approach the same venue?
Yeah, it's always interesting because you're always talking to them, especially for me. Obviously, I was fishing. So I'm thinking Davey kept saying to me, Are you not fed up yet? Do you not just think we're just not going to catch these? And I was like, no, mate, I think we're going to catch it. We're going to catch it. He's like, these fish are idiots. We're not going to catch them. Like, they're just mugging us. And it's nice to fish with people. You always get different opinions. You always get someone's confidence is peaking as another one's dropping. That's how carp fishing works when you're fishing the same lake. There's highs and lows. It's never great for all of you at once. You're never all doing the same thing. You've never got, and that's nice, I think, because a lot of the time you go to a lake, or certainly myself go to a lake, you don't always know what's going on elsewhere. But on this kind of thing, none of us are keeping secrets. We're trying to catch it as a group. No one cares who it is. And yeah, it's interesting. It's fun.
On its accessible nature, it reminds me slightly, you say it's unique as far as a record goes, and it would be. It sort of reminds me, there were 2 mirrors in Bluebell, Dave and the Zedfish, and that, people targeted them. And Dave, I think, more than the Zedfish, was a bit friendlier, but it was sort of known as coming out to the person who'd never been to the venue before, chucked a huge lump of luncheon meat down the edge on a sea rod that he'd inherited from his granddad, and the person who didn't fish in the way that was expected of it often caught the prize fish. I mean, does this common, I don't know enough about this common, has it got a surprise in it? Has it got that element of madness in it that it could trip up to something unconventional?
I would imagine, I think every carp has that ability. The one thing I do know about it, one of the things I know about it is that often it's caught on its own. So you have your group there, someone will be catching several carp, and then someone will catch one carp, him. So I think it would have been caught. Like they say often it's the person who just thinks they're going to blank. They're just sat there, his mate's having it off down the other end.
Which makes it a psychological game, doesn't it? Which is very much what came into play this week. Dovey was really, really had itchy feet, wanted to make it happen. You were slightly more content because I think that you've seen a bit more going on there. Elle was happy to sit.
I don't mind not catching. Like if I can feel like I say, I go there for one carp. If there's enough telling me where I need to be, I will stick with that. I don't really care what's going on elsewhere. A lot of anglers aren't like that. And every time I fish with Stokesy, for example, he's always way more into moving because of what he's seen than I am. I've never been that way. Don't get me wrong, I'm not just going to sit and rot, but I would there. I would just sit there and wait for that opportunity because it seems like that's the way to go. And, you know, it's only a small lake. You're always going to have carp come across you. It's not like you're never going to see a fish. It's not 100 acres. You don't feel that stupid for just going, no, I'm staying to this area. And I think there you can fish like that. But yeah, we all had different, like you say. Dovey was really, he doesn't like not catching when he's got carp on him. No one does. But he was far more interested in moving elsewhere to make something happen, whereas I was kind of a bit like, I'll make what I can of where I am, but I'm not deviating from this area of the lake.
And then you've got the diametrically opposed, you know, style of angling, which is Ollie on the previous trip, who's only interested in fishing when there's a fish physically bubbling in front of him, and as soon as that stops, he wants to move on to the next patch of bubbles, which may not be on that, even in that part of the lake. So, and opposite him, you've got Nick Hellier, who again was more static. So, yeah, you know, we're going to bring different styles, and it's going to be fun to see which ones finally trip it up.
We've got a lot of these booking-only lakes now. Last 10 years, I'd say they've proliferated around the scene. Good, bad, indifferent? What's your sort of views on them?
I think for a fishery owner, it's obviously very attractive because if you've got something good, it allows you to make the most money whilst it's still there. And actually, I think you get a little bit more of a personal arrangement with your guests. You could maybe even vet them if you want to. Fish care's probably better as a result. Does it come down to like who can afford to fish for these fish? Maybe, but certainly it's easier to stump up the money and save up the money maybe than to get a Redmire ticket in the 70s. Do you know what I mean? So actually, they're a bit more democratic, maybe. Yeah.
Does it take the skill out of the angling that you've had to book already for March 2025? You can't go on a whim of a great southwesterly and low pressure or anything like that?
I don't have much of an opinion on it because it has never been and probably will never be, other than in very rare circumstances like we've just been speaking about. They won't be the places I ever go to. At the end of the day, if you're running a day ticket or you're running an exclusive bookings venue, I see them as two different things, really. I guess they are. I think it's probably a good thing.
Yeah.
More than it's a bad thing, because so many people, I remember doing it as a kid, drove to Linear with my mate. We were 16, 17 years old, never been to Linear before, heard all about it, loved it, went up there. You can't get a swim next door to each other. And we really wanted that. We really wanted to fish next door to each other. Why wouldn't we? You know, we've just been driven all that way by our parents. And, you know, you go for a hell of a faff to find two swims side by side. There might be shit swims that you don't even want to go in when there's actually good swims that haven't got the gap between them. And of course, looking now, you'd go, well, you go in that one and I'll go in that one and we'll have 3 or 4 people between us. But for a lot of people that go into these types of lakes, I would imagine they're going there for a reason. And it's probably not just to catch carp. They're probably going with their mates. And actually, that might be the main reason for it. They want to go and have a social. They want to catch some carp. Can you do that on the busy day ticket lakes of today? I would say very rarely. And can you, if you book the whole lake? Absolutely, you know.
Yeah, I'm very much in that position. I've a group of mates, and we've been to a few, and I'd say if the venues weren't right, we just wouldn't go. But if the right venues are there, then we'd probably book them between us. You know, been to Ashmead, which was great. I had a bit of a love-hate relationship with that lake, but a lot of the lads really, really enjoyed it. Redmire, which is a bit different, again, probably not going to appeal to everybody. But after having done that, we're then always on the lookout for places that could accommodate us, but have that X factor as well. Somewhere like Waterside would be of interest, but we'd also looked at, I don't know, there's some cool fish in that Woolpack bookable lake, for instance. But I don't think there's, you know, it's funny you should say that there's lots of them. Yes, there are. But how many of them have got the X factor that's going to make me want to pick up the phone and go? I don't know. At the minute, I can't think of too many.
But yes. Then at the lower level, there are waters, say like Bulking, the Embry have got a few bookable.
If you just want to catch carp,
yes,
there's tons. And I think as a model goes, I think they're probably the best because better level of angling. Perhaps it's more relaxed. You don't get the confrontational side of day ticket fishing either. The fish are going to benefit. The owners know who they've got on the lake. There's an element of like responsibility. So yeah, I'm all for it, mate.
It's like turning up to a syndicate with just all your favourite mates there, just all the anglers that you like, and without the other 6 or 7. It's a nice vibe. You all start fair and square at the beginning. Like I say, the limited times I've done it, I've never not had a good time. I think that's important. You know, if you own a lake and you want people to come pay to fish there and for a few days and go home again, it's the best way to give them the best experience. Everyone, you'll all know going into a draw that someone's going to get the best swim, someone's going to get the worst swim, but you accept that because you're in a draw, and that's fair and square. But if you're turning up to a lake, and from the minute you get there, all 4 or 5 of you are looking at swims that you don't want to fish in, I imagine you feel like you're wasting your money straight away. So yeah, I think bookable lakes, you could argue, it's a better idea than your standard day ticket lake. But I'm sure the revenue is not there. And
I guess the market will determine. And you mentioned Ashmead, and that's actually reverted away from booking, hasn't it, recently? And there's a whole lot of regulars there who are disgruntled, and some who probably are relishing the chance. But maybe that's a different topic entirely. I mentioned embryo, I mentioned bulking. Embryo got you out of a hole, didn't they? Going back to what is the most recent underwater film on the site, Oscar Thornton. You travelled some miles.
Yeah.
Tell us how you came to fish the venue in the end.
Long story short, we were supposed to fish a syndicate. Where does he live? Is it Bournemouth or something?
Dorset.
Miles away from me. We were supposed to fish, or he was supposed to fish, an incredible syndicate that we were delighted to have the opportunity to fish. I'd punished him for a long time to get permission to do so. We did, but it just didn't go to plan. We had water clarity issues, and we ended up leaving there. From there, we went to multiple different venues, and embryo really got us out the shit. I know Matt Pettit well. I really like Matt. Really nice person, really good angler, really helpful. He's always a nice bloke to speak to, no matter whether it's work related or fishing related. I enjoy talking to him, and he saved us. Really, they kind of just said you can go wherever you like within reason. And we went from venue to venue and eventually ended up at Devil's Lane in the Colne Valley, having visited multiple other venues on the way. And what a lake that is, honestly. I wouldn't say I'm a lake snob by any means, but it doesn't take a lot to put me off a venue. I loved everything about that lake. It still felt quite rough and ready, but at the same time it had been manicured, maybe is the word to use, enough for it to feel like a proper syndicate. It didn't feel left alone and gone to rack and ruin, but it had that element to it at the same time, which I really like.
You pulled a fair bit of metalwork out of one of the spots.
That's what I mean. It was still a proper carp lake. It had still got all your fall and it hasn't. It's very easy these days, I think, for people to feel like they have to, I don't know, do a lot of work. Let's just say do a lot of work.
Sort of sanitize a lake.
Yeah.
We don't want that generally.
No, I don't. I don't want it stripped of everything that gives it its character. I don't want all the weed took out of it and all the snags took out of it I don't like that. Personally, I don't like it. I understand it. I understand why you may need to do that. I also make an argument for you should always, if you run a syndicate, you should be able to have people that don't necessarily warrant that happening. But I think it's a shame when a lake is 1 minute it's beautiful, and I've seen it loads of times over the years, and then you go back to the 2 years later and it's almost unrecognisable, where there's been so much done to the place that it just loses its soul in a way. This wasn't like that. I loved it from the minute I stepped foot on it. To me, I looked at it and I thought, if I could own a lake, it'd be one like this. Wasn't too big, wasn't too small, crystal clear, up and down all over the place, good stock of carp, reeds, snags, everything you would, if you're going to build a carp lake, it'd look a bit like that. Certainly I would anyway. And yeah, we were lucky enough to have an opportunity to make our underwater film there, because at times it felt like we were going to have to pull the plug on it, but we kept going, we kept driving, we kept trying, and eventually, We struck gold with that place, I think, and we had a great trip there.
It's a great film. For those who haven't seen it, I would recommend it, or a series of films. If you love the lake, what have you got against PVA bag rigs, solid PVA bag rigs? Because it almost as though you took a dislike to them in Oscar's rig box.
I know Oscar quite well, so I've known Oscar for a long time, and I've always took the piss out of his rigs. But
what is it about? So that he started with a solid bag, is it?
Yeah.
And he was using an 8mm, like from the mainline match range, so a very small.
Yes.
What is it that you took against? Is it the hook size to bait ratio? Is it the length of the? Something was that you thought? I could tell from watching it, you thought this isn't going to work.
I said to him from the minute we got there, you're going to get done on that. I kept that, I said to him, I said it in the film as well. I think he's going to get done, and he did. And I think he very quickly understood why. And I actually thought when he said this to me, that's a good point, because I hadn't really considered that. But essentially, he was using a 4-inch, I think 4-inch Hooklink, supple braid, wide gape hook, which is which is my favourite pattern of hook.
Standard solid PVA bag fare, isn't it?
Yeah.
That he's caught many carp on.
Yeah. Aggressive shrink tube kicker. And I just look at that and think they'll just spit that out. Like, unless you... And I know he's caught loads on it, but I've watched those fish feed a lot. And unless they're moving quite aggressively with their head... For me, you're relying entirely on them just hooking themselves.
Does that mean the solid PVA bag, as a principle, is entirely flawed?
I don't know. I have my opinions on that style of Hooklink. Like, it has... I don't think the way he has his shrink tube helps.
What would you have done in a solid bag to make sure that
I wouldn't have had my shrink tube like that, and I always fish a shot beneath the hook now. Not on the hook, but I've done that for a number of years just to make it but I've used that rig a lot, and largely my opinion is based on this, because I've done a lot of edge fishing over the years. So many times I've heard people say you should be using short braided hook links and all that. I've never liked them, but there was a period in my fishing where I tried them, because I thought, all right, well, I am the sort of person that will try things. I've got the ability to watch these fish. I can see when my rigs, why not? And I got cleared out on them. I didn't catch as many as I felt I should. And if I'm getting cleaned out, that's, for me, that should never happen. You should never be getting cleaned out. And through the time I used them, I came to the conclusion that they just weren't. But I was not using them in solid bags. I was using the rig he was using out of a solid bag. And to me, it's only a solid bag rig until that bag is disturbed. And once the bag is disturbed, it becomes a normal rig. Because fished over a patch of bait, it may have gone out in a solid bag, but like I say, once the bag's disturbed, you could easily lower the same rig on top of it. So I'd fished with that kind of thing in the past. But the conclusion Oscar came to was that normally when he fishes with those solids and those rigs, he's fishing for a bite at a time. So he's casting at shows, things like that. And in that case, what I said at the start was what you're relying on is movement. And that with a hook link so short as that, I feel like you're relying on quick movement. They pick up, they move, they get hooked straight away. He wasn't getting that, and sure enough, he just got spat out on it. But he said quite quickly, that I think the reason for that is normally I'm using it, casting it, showing fish. They see the bag, they swim down with this sole intention of picking up the contents of that bag, which includes his rig. They're moving as I feel like they need to, and he catches them. And there's no denying he catches loads of carp on it. But yeah, from the off, I just thought you were going to get done on it, and he did.
Do you think a factor was? Do you think he could have caught on that spot on a solid bag if he hadn't have put so many free offerings and quite
I think he'd have been
more
more likely
mix?
to.
Yeah, if that's all they had to home in on.
Yeah, I think they'd have been more. I think they'd more like. I believe the only reason people use that rig is because it's the only rig you can put in a solid bag
and just sling it wherever you want.
I guarantee you, every angler that uses that rig, or all the anglers I know that use solid bags, even if they use them a lot, they don't ever use that rig unless it's in a solid bag. And that to me is necessity. It's not because they think it's a great rig. It's because it's the only rig you can fold up in a ball inside a bag and cast. They don't use it. Oscar doesn't use that rig not in a solid bag. And all those other solid bag anglers, who I don't doubt have caught loads of carp on it, they don't use it outside of a solid bag either. If you could, they'd probably have a spinner rig in their bag, wouldn't they? So take it, look at it just as a rig. Then I my personal opinion is that is so far removed from what we all deem to be the most effective style of rig. Certainly based on what's popular today, it's only used because it's the only rig that can be fished in a solid bag. And that, to me, straight away just says there's major flaws with it, because if it was that good, it would be used outside of a solid bag as well.
I would say, and who knows, but match anglers and fishing natural venues, albeit for smaller carp, but fishing somewhere like Boddington, where the best match anglers in this country go, are fishing hybrid or method feeder tactics. Effectively, a very similar presentation. They're often using mono hook links because braid is often banned in matches. That's a very similar presentation, and these are the best match anglers we've got who arguably could outfish, better anglers.
Are these small fish though?
The Boddington fish are up to 25 pounds, There's more of them, there's more competition, but it's a very similar presentation, isn't it? That, you've got that piece of bait lying amongst some pellets, effectively.
I think the length of it is I just don't like those really short rigs. I would argue with anyone that a longer rig is better than a shorter rig, and I think that's one of its major flaws. If we're still talking specifically about what Oscar used at the time, I don't think they're as good at those short lengths. I think maybe in reference to what you were saying, the smaller the carp, I think you have to use vastly different rigs for small fish as you do big fish. The films that we've got coming out with Henry in the matter of days, so probably will be live once the time people listening to this, you will see just how hard it is to catch small fish on big carp rigs. I never really thought that would be the case. I know how hard little carp are to catch off the surface. I've gone surface fishing loads of times, and they're an absolute pain in the arse to catch, considering how ferocious they can be. But I think the same applies. I think big fish need a different style of rig, and small fish need a different style of rig. And obviously, from what I've seen, I believe that to be gradually being made clear. We have footage to back it and stuff now. But yeah, like I stand to that point. I think the rig's too short, and I think that most people only use it because, certainly big carp anglers only use it because it's the rig for a solid bag, not because it's the best thing you could have on the bottom at the time.
What struck me, sorry, Richard, if you want to say anything on the rigs.
No, I think a bird just flew into the window.
Oh.
But no, I was going to say probably, I think maybe you have to look at why people use solid bags and decide whether that gives you enough of an advantage to accept the lack of, functionality of the rig. It's one of the few ways that you can fish into shit, isn't it? Let's be honest. If you don't know what your spot is like, you could argue that you're not fishing very efficiently, or you've got that one chance, which again ties in with what Oscar was saying about the singles approach. He thinks it's more effective with singles, or fished singly as opposed to over bait. We've all wanged solids out. I think most of us have into low weed. I'd actually like to see us do something on that. Just see how it sits and all that kind of thing. But
the solid bag is an unbelievable presentation. But I feel like everything has its downside. And I think the solid bag enables you to do so many things you can't, but you have to fish with a rig I don't think's that good.
I'm just sitting here thinking what's available to us and talking to Dovey at the weekend about him fishing little chods over silkweed. Silkweed would probably be what I would think of as prime bag territory because it sits flat generally, and the bag will sit amongst it. Maybe it's the worst option for that, the solid bag of the two, of the things that you can use over low-lying weed. Even use a hinge, couldn't you?
I'd be interested to know how many people that are avid users of solid bags, how many of you use that style of hook link, short, supple, because you want to or because you have to? Because I think it probably is you have to. I think that is true. Like
I just think the contradictory elements of solid bag fishing are that you're looking to focus fish on a very tight area, and yet you're using a rig that needs to be tightened in order to work. So they have to move, and yet you're focusing them on an area where they're not going to move. So I just think probably what happens is the bag is disturbed, eaten by small fish, disturbed by carp, and in the end you're catching them on a single hook bait, and they've decided to take it, like you said. Ultimately, they've seen that yellow. Like I've used solids with the Withy Pool, Steve's Renyard's rig. I think it looks absolutely mega. Whether they're then taken as a single or whether it's taken as part of that feeding process, I don't know. But I'd imagine it'd work pretty well as a single hook bait because they're going to right themselves and get hooked.
Another thing that struck me, away from the rig side of things, did a carp feed in the middle of that spot?
They were so scared.
It was
Why
really
would they be?
noticeable.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's if you look at it like simply, it's really obvious why they didn't. They started where they felt safe. I can't imagine at any point they ever really felt that safe, and I think that just made them start at the back and work their way in. And by the time they worked their way in, generally when they get to we'll call it the danger line, wherever his rig was, he was catching them. But it took a long time to get him there. He was baiting heavily into the snags with lots of fine particle and things like that, which gives them plenty of reason to not come onto the spot. But obviously it means once they do get there, they're very confident. So, there's that argument that they didn't feel safe on the spot because they knew the further they came out the snags, the less safe they were, and rightly so, because that was the case. It was a blatant spot. It was very close to the bank. Like, very close to the bank. Like, the camera, I could take the camera out of the water by hand. The margins were deep. I think I positioned it with the boat, but I don't think I took it out with the boat. I'm sure I could reach down with the pole and just lift it out. Either way, if you tripped over whilst doing your rod, you'd probably land spot side of the camera. It was that tight to the bank. And, carp, I feel like when you're talking that close to the bank, they do know. They've got that massive sanctuary of snags that they were coming from. And I think for good reason, they were just on edge.
Do you believe and subscribe to that trail of breadcrumbs out of the snag to the spot thing that Oscar did?
Massively, but not personally, not in the quantity of small baits that I've always done it. I've always done that, and like I say, I've done lots of edge fishing. I deem that to be a very important part of it. But me personally, I wouldn't have put as much small particles just for the time, because I want them on me as quick as possible, and I want to give them as little reason to be able to stay there. I still think a trail works, but when you're painting with that kind of stuff, it can prolong things. But how do I could have fished that spot, baited gently, and they never came out onto the spot. You don't know. It definitely worked. What he did definitely worked. He got fish on the spot, and he caught fish. So I'm not saying what he did was wrong by any stretch.
What jumps out at me, El, and you're in a good place to answer this, is when you think back to fishing the Car Park Lake, Brute's Corner sort of area, you were fishing for like one of the most educated, in inverted commas, carp we've ever had in Arthurtail. Like, the mind boggles how that fish was ever caught, because he was a crafty feeder anyway. It clearly must know the game to a degree that probably almost no carp has ever known the game, because it was big and targeted for 30 years.
Yeah, a long time. Yeah.
What were you ever able to watch those fish? Like, and did they were they comfortable leaving the snags, for instance?
I never saw anything in Brutes. When I did a bit of time in the snags, which is round from Brute's Corner, and there was a period in there where I saw sort of ghosting fish, but very quick glimpses. Never saw them over the spot feeding.
But you had bites off that.
I got bites in there, yeah. I believe to this day I hooked and was cut off by off. I believe that wholeheartedly to this day. I had a period of fishing in that corner where it was just going right. I had a little string of bites. Arthur was seen on my spot. Again, I don't know to this day, but you just had to take every single thing into account there. As I think you always should. I think you should always fish to even sometimes you do things that you think, it's a bit silly, it's a bit over the top. I don't believe it is, because you never know when your opportunity will come and how important that opportunity is to you, and if it'll ever come again. So I've always been of the opinion, certainly since those days, that anything you can do to make it harder for them is better. The better you can do everything you're capable of doing, the better. But no, I never saw those fish. But again, that they know. Baby orange, I believe I got cleaned out by baby orange several times in different parts of the lake as well. Like that was probably the one carp I look back on and think I should have caught you, but you definitely got the upper hand. How? Don't really know, but it did. So, like I say, I can think of 3 or 4 different times in different parts of the lake where that something was cleaning me out. And one of the times I know it was baby orange. The other 2 times, baby orange was caught in the swim next door to me in the periods after all my activity was going on, and I believe it was baby orange. But yeah, no, I never actually saw. I wasn't someone lucky enough to be able to stand in a tree, watch the fish come in. You daren't stand in the trees there, and do it. Like it was always get the rod out and sit still and out the way, because you're as likely to ruin your chance more likely to ruin your chance than you are to watch your chance happen in front of you.
Did everyone adhere to that etiquette side? Would people go and look in the snags when you were fishing it? Gate, surely.
Not, like a bit, yeah, a bit. But most people
would ask.
Wouldn't, if you were in the gate, like if I was in the gate and someone went in the gate snags, they would be told not to do that again, and I think, that was.
But I think. Sorry, I mean, I know I've massively sidetracked, and apologies for that, Tom. But I just think it was like when you think about snaggy situations, for carp that weren't even that particularly that I think they've been fished for a long time as a club water, haven't they? At Devils.
Those carp at Devils knew what was going on. Like you can tell very quickly, because if they're not coming onto the spot and eating happily, then you know that they know something's wrong. And it was a real struggle to get them on the spot and eating. It was hard to get them eating boilies. It was why that is. We never truly understand whether it's because of the camera, because there's always an argument for that. They're so aware. Is it that whenever we look and think, oh, why are they doing that? Is it just that? If we took the camera out and fished the same trip again, would he have caught 6 rather than 2? You don't know, never will. But
the good thing is though that can be because it is on every shoot. You cancel it out.
Yeah, I suppose
relatively good or bad based on what we see, and just rule the camera out, because we'll never not have that.
No, we never will. No, and I say you just take it for face value. And from what I saw, the fish were coming from an area of safety onto an area of not safety, onto an area of unsafety, and the closer they got to that, and the further they got from safety, the more cautious they appeared to be. And like I say, Oscar's line of baiting probably really helped to pull them from one to the other.
Do you think that applies, though? It seems to me, watching these underwater films, that it's being drilled into me as I watch them more and more. The edge of the spot is going to be more productive than the centre. But a spot out 80 yards, surrounded by nothing but a glowing gravel spot, that's not as unsafe as being right next to snags and you're gradually coming further out, is it? But clearly it would seem to me that still in that situation, open water, edge of the spot, still better.
I think so.
I think pretty soon, Tom, we might even have like a set of rules, if you like. And, from the underwater observations and sort of principle within those will be this idea that you start on the edge of your spot, or the fish certainly do. And I don't think that matters whether it's in the edge or out in the pond. It seems to be universal. And you could probably even make the argument that they feel safer, within bolting distance of their home. There's no reason for me to think that they would feel any more uncertain in the snags than they would in the pond. They don't know they're big. If they're in open water, I think sometimes they feel vulnerable. Certainly in the day, why wouldn't they? Birds come over, they spook. These fish were close to this. I mean, I wasn't on this shoot, so I'm much like you. I've only seen the films, but time and again, also we see this, whether it's in our heads or not, and people can comment. I think it'd be nice to hear from people to see if they see the same things. This idea that fish cross lines within our field of view. We had it on the Steve Renyard shoot. We felt like there was a line that they really were reluctant to cross, come up the shelf. This shoot, there was the stick. It happens nearly every shoot where there's something visible on the bottom, and sometimes why wouldn't they use cues after all? In terms of navigate where they're safe and where they're not.
I think something I've recently thought about is actually fishing through your bait, particularly like towards these sort of snaggy margin spots. Now, you would never do it. Everything you ever read, everything you ever tell yourself is always put your bait beyond your rigs. Now, the more I think about that, and the more I've watched fish feeding over lines on the underwater, it's like loads of times I've watched them feeding through your lines. You don't even get a liner. Like they don't really seem to spook if they get really caught up in it, which we've rarely seen. But I think, hang on, I would always put my rig. Say you've got a snag to your left, your rig's generally one of the closest ones to you. All the bait is beyond that going into the snag. There's probably a case to be made to fish straight through your bait, because you might get liners, but you're probably going to catch them before they even reach that area anyway. And I do often wonder that now, like, if the snag is where they feel safe, then you should probably have your rig as close to that as possible, and you can still bait over your lead core, over your line. In your head, it's not ideal, but that's what Oscar ended up doing. Watch the film. Like, he was, and if you'd have asked him if he'd have wanted to do that at the start, well, you can tell he didn't, because he didn't do that at the start. You always want your bait clean out the way you're line. That you could easily make it a lot harder for yourself by doing that. And I think you trick them into a false. If they're doing it on purpose, you're tricking them into a false sense of security by doing that.
I'm gonna shout out the godfather of carp fishing, Tim Paisley, or modern carp fishing anyway. I distinctly remember diagrams in Carp World of his baited area at Fisherville, I think, where he would establish a patch and fish all three beyond it.
Straight through it.
Yeah, straight through it, like and out the other side. So I can't remember why, but he was definitely writing about that.
They do that in the matches. When I worked at Calder, I filmed a few of the World Carp Championships, whatever. And I'm sure they used to bait in lines, and they would fish 20 yards through. The idea is very simple. You have a massive patch of bait. What do you want them to eat first? Your hook bait. So you just carve your rig straight through the bait, rod length or two off the back of it. They turn up from beyond you. It's very rare when you're fishing, the carp are coming from your side onto your bait. They generally always approach you from the back. It makes total sense. It feels wrong because you assume they're feeding all over your baited area and they're going to bump into your lines, they're going to run away scared. I guess what they're doing there is they don't even come in. You're getting them before that situation even arises.
How many times are we going to have to see this and say on camera, one off the spot, mate, one off the spot?
Yeah.
Like, one off the spot. Like, what about this week? behind your bait.
Yeah, off the bat. I've always fished on it and on the edge. I've done that since I was a kid. I don't remember. Someone must have told me to do that. Can't remember. I can't imagine at 15, 16 years I'd have just done it because I thought of it myself. Someone probably said, "Oh, try one off." But whenever I fished, and a lot of the times over the years I have fished two. Generally, one is on the edge of my bait, but I never fish 1 4 foot further. And maybe that...
And further is subjective, isn't it? Because
closer to them.
Quite often, it has to always be, let's say, close to the middle of the pond. Or where they're
closer to them.
Out of bounds or whatever it is, like the snag line, just thinking about what fish and their directions of travel. In fact, we ended up talking about that in the What We Learned piece with Oscar about manipulating the direction at which a fish approaches your rig, which once again came up in the film, Tom, didn't it? I'm sorry if I've gone for one of your questions, but it's only because I sat with Oscar and recorded it in the What We Learned film, and he was kind of the opinion that, let's say at Rockford, one of the waters that he fishes that isn't snag bait, fish can come at you at all angles. Is there a way that you can manipulate their behaviour to your ends? I don't know if there is. Well, he didn't think so, and I'm struggling to think how you might, but
you probably can though. You know, I mean, if it's open water, which direction do they come from? You're probably struggling a bit more. But
maybe, but do they just like sheep? In a field, if you're out rambling, if a sheep using a field or whatever that animal is that carves that little line in the ground, they go the same route every night.
There's definitely an element of that there. I think there's an element of they're going to come to me from there. How precise you can be with that.
Well, sheep are.
But
sheep are, and for no apparent reason. I think there's a lot of that in nature, isn't there, that perhaps we don't take account of, is this idea that they're going to go exactly the way that makes most sense to them, and they're probably then going to redo it, because why wouldn't you? You know, if optimal foraging, that kind of thing, would suggest that once you found the correct thing to do, you do it again and again and again.
Yeah, they don't swim accidentally to places. They will have their routes, won't they?
I think like they do. Like carp are completely random in the open water, that they're just bumbling around.
Yeah, that's what.
They're probably not, are they? They're probably.
Why would they?
No, exactly. Yeah.
It makes no sense. Nothing else does.
They don't accidentally swim out the out of bounds. No. And they do on purpose swim to the out of bounds.
That was the other thing.
So they know where they're going and why.
The other thing, like as we were mentioning, these kind of visual cues. There's no coincidence that the old out of bounds rope. It's night and day.
It may as well be mesh from the floor to the bottom at times. Like,
we've all been there.
When it came to reeling in that PVA bag that clearly wasn't working, I felt for Oscar, I felt there was pressure on Oscar. There was a moment where you said, shall I leave the tent, you go and tie up a new rig? Because I was thinking, what rig would I put out now? And it struck me that there were many options in that situation. You know, you could have gone for a fluoro D rig, you could have gone for what he went for, you could have gone for a wafter, a popper, you know. What would you have put out instead of the PVA bag on that spot?
I'm not probably the right person to ask. I use the same rig for 99% of my fishing. I feel very fortunate to be faithful enough in it and have something that works well enough for me. I don't doubt it at any point. You know, the rig I use all the time is 7-8 inches of braid with a wide gape hook, a little shot beneath it, whether it's a pop-up, a bottom bait or a wafter, and then it depends largely on the hook bait after that. Everyone will know what rig I'm talking about, I'm sure most people will. That's what I'd have put out because that's what I use.
And I suppose Oscar did the same, didn't he? He went for his tried and tested.
And that's what I wanted him to do, really. In the back of my mind, I wanted him to put his blowback rig on because that is, maybe because it's similar to the kind of thing I like to use. So naturally, you think, but actually, it is quite different to what I use. And I wanted him to use that because I know that should be and normally would be his second choice. I was hoping at the time he wasn't going to go, I'm going to use this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and that, and that, and that.
Yeah.
And then I'll be like, what the fuck's that? I've never seen you use that before. So for the film's sake and my sake, I wanted him to reach for his next best thing. And I don't even think the solid bag was his... I don't feel like the solid bag maybe would be day-to-day his favourite choice for that spot. When I've seen him fishing them sorts of spots in the past, he put the blowback on them. When I've filmed with him in the past, he put that blowback rig on them. And I was kind of surprised at the start when he didn't. But, it does make sense. Little solid bag, drop it in the pole, slide it down the margin, bosh, straight over the spot with, it made sense. But I'm glad he put the blowback rig on because it is nice for us to go filming with people and see them use the rigs that you associate them with. I think it's important for us when you're there, and it's important for the viewers as well who are watching.
And it was a rig he inherited from a second-hand rig box we discovered in the final.
Amazing story.
You didn't know this till the other day, did you?
No.
Till this week.
For those who haven't seen it then, Rick.
Yes, so when Oscar was a kid, I asked him how he developed the rig. And he bought a job lot of tackle off an old boy, I think as he put it, opened the rig board, and there they were. And presumably as the very much the junior angler of the two, he was like, well, this is good enough for him, so it's going to be good enough for me. And he's carried on using it, presumably for like 15 years since. So, just copied it straight off someone else's rig board. Because it is quite an unusual rig. And I think most people would have doubts about that, the aggressive nature of that kicker.
On social media, people like...
Did they?
Oh, it's same as his reel handle's been, or his rod's been. It sparks... it sparks comments.
But I've seen there's plenty of successful rigs that have that closed gape. So I'd love to know how they work, because you've got, I think John Claridge used to use something very similar, the doubled up amnesia and the hook sitting at 90 degrees. Mike Winston the same with the piece of shot. Max Cottis, I think, similar rig with that slid on lead. Sort of, I think it's a fly tying little shot effectively. Sat through a swivel, but all of them had the 90 degrees. Whether there's some kind of degree of flexion and opening that happens during the sucking and blow, whether they suck it in and the rig opens as the hook link is at full extent. I think you could see that a bit more if it was a withy pool, for instance, where the shrink tube is a bit bouncier. or whether they just hooks them in the scissors because it's on. When they tighten it, that's it. I don't know.
The hook holds were interesting. Because they weren't bottom lip centre, were they? I think one he maybe thought the first fish slid or came. But
the one was in the top lip. One was in the top lip. One was.
I don't know how you do that?
Was one in the. One was in the top lip. Was the
They're
other one
always in the scissors, aren't they?
They both in the top lip.
I think the first fish, there were two fish caught, and I think the bigger fish was caught. He said, I think he calls out, "We've hooked it upside down, Elliot," because it was hooked in the top lip.
And the other one,
and the other one, I think he thought had slipped out.
It's impossible
in the net.
How does that even happen?
They were hooked in the top lip. Yeah,
I've
hooked carp, and it's very rare. Like, it can be done, but how? God knows.
Yeah.
Do you think? Because obviously, I reckon if Dan Fairbrass was here, he reckons, I'm pretty sure, I'm hoping not misquoting him, but he reckons the difference between the scissors and the bottom lip is a matter of rig length as opposed to mechanics.
I think the scissors is lead tight. I think the scissors is, they move, it hits, and as they're moving, a fish moving away from you, you're not going to hook.
As opposed to lifting.
Lifting. You're not going to hook it there. Mm-hmm. Moving away, it's going to naturally go to the corners.
Yeah.
I think bottom lip, I think partly it's the actually way the rigs perform within the mouth. I wouldn't know, but I wouldn't imagine Oscar hooks a massive amount of carp in the bottom lip. I would imagine most of his are scissors.
An awful lot of bottom bait rigs hooking scissors.
And bear in mind what he uses is what I have essentially used in various tweaked forms for over 10 years, since I was a kid. Relatively long length of braid, coated braid. Not too stiff, not too supple, wide gape hook, shrink tube kicker, quite a big shrink tube kicker. So when I look at Oscars, I feel like I can speak from experience, having played around with this kind of stuff a lot. I don't believe a kicker of that's that aggressive is anywhere near as effective as one that's opened up.
I almost think it can't be.
Personally. In fact, I'm going to say I know that it isn't. But again, everything's subjective, and some people might want to argue the case, but there's a reason I don't fish mine like that, and I've tried them and I've played with them, and I'm pretty confident through that. But good anglers will catch lots of carp. Like, we're never there. We never have the ability to see how many times we get spat out. So many times we go filming. You might see fish on the spot all day long. When they catch one, it feels like drama getting to that point. You feel like you've missed loads of opportunities. You feel like you've been mugged off, and eventually you've caught one. If you're sat on the bank and you've caught one on your first day, you never think, oh, finally I've caught one 10 hours in. But you didn't know there was fish on the spot for 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
So, Oscar's caught hundreds of big carp. Oscar's caught more big carp, in fact, than most people alive now. And I mean that. If you actually ask Oscar to tell you how many very, very big carp he has caught.
And he's a successful match carp angler as well, which is almost a different sport in entirety.
But he uses the same rigs, though.
Yeah.
And that's what he's caught all them carp on. So I'm not going to, for 1 second, say that they don't work or they could be better. But I do believe that he might have caught a few more big carp. That's all I'll say.
Last time we were sitting round this table, Rich said you had yet to see a carp be hooked on the ejection. Mm-hmm. So are we saying that the blowback rig, which I would say is potentially an anti-eject, or in that traditional sense, are we saying that it's actually not doing what we think it's doing?
I think the blowback element is once they're hooked.
Yeah, I've always kind of felt that.
I think it just removes the pivot point from the bend, which could pull the hook back out, effectively leave it up to the eye, which means it's less likely to do so. I think it's as simple as that. So no, it's not. It's not anti-eject. It's more like anti-throw, I think.
Yes. Yeah.
Simple as that, Tom.
Sharpened hooks. They caused him some problems at times, fishing hard gravel spots. There was a couple of times when repeatedly casting. You had an open water spot as well. What's your take on? I mean, do you use Kamakuras? Do you use hand sharpened hooks? The pair of you.
Yeah.
And what's your talking of disadvantages outweighing the advantages and vice versa with solid PVA bags? Where do you stand on sharpened hooks and just how fragile they can be?
Well, Elle was first on the.
I think we
out
were
of the
quite
two
close
of yeah, I
together,
mean
weren't we were early on it though. We were early on.
Yeah,
Sharpened.
so James Armstrong as
And Garth.
and yeah, Garth and our mates Garth and Jimmy were about as because they both know Hayward, and obviously Jason is kind of the OG hook sharpener, really.
2012? What 2012? I'd say it was.
I reckon.
Maybe earlier.
DHP, I reckon, still. So
I got shown it first at the Carp Fest when everything got fucking stolen.
Welford Pools.
When we got robbed at Welford Pools.
Yeah,
that was the first time I saw it.
Yeah, no, certainly like the late noughties, I'd say. Into the early whatever your next one is.
And have you both used them ever since?
Yeah.
Simple as that.
On and off for me.
Yeah.
But now there's the Kamakuras. It's kind of a no-brainer unless I don't know. There've been situations that I haven't, and I've gone back to out the bag. But even out the bag, I do the old jag file job and just do a couple of mil at the top. I've never necessarily subscribed to the same principles that these guys do, which is obviously that idea that, without being too graphic, and I don't want to be on here, but the thinner and sharper and longer that is, the easier it will slide.
I believe that to be not.
I think once it's pricked and it rights itself, all of that weight of the lead and the line and stuff, it doesn't matter how thick you're. It's all about the end bit for me. But I happily use the Kamakuras. Yeah, I don't catch enough toms to worry about. Getting through too many hooks or whatever. So
I saw a comment from Lewis Porter on Facebook in the last week. Lewis Porter, the Fox one, not the Corda one. I think he was replying to a Fox post saying, "Do you use sharpened hooks or not?" And he was unequivocal in his reply. No, from all the underwater footage he'd watched with the Matrix, their match brand, and Fox doing underwater stuff, he said that he didn't think sharpened hooks made an ounce of difference. It was quite startling for me to see that, given what we've sort of been led to believe. I mean, can you put yourself in his shoes? Can you see why he's saying that?
I think there's more to sharpening hooks. I've always looked at it as more, I've never looked at it just sharpening the point. So the one thing I have always thought heavily on is getting the barb. So getting to the barb quicker. Whenever I'll be quite honest, whenever I put a packeted hook in my finger, you barely got to touch it against your skin and it grabs. That's pretty sharp to me. But I think to get the hook point and the distance between the hook point and the barb, to get that lot better, because that's what you want buried as quick as possible. I think a big part of sharpening for me always was making the wire thinner from the bit between the barb and the point. The thinner that is, the quicker you get to the barb. So part of that is hook point sharpening, but it's also like point thinning as well.
I'm sure you just disagreed with me when I said the same thing about
the sliding thing.
That's what I mean. No, I don't mean that. I mean sliding in, like the quick speed of penetration.
People used to say to me, "Oh, if they're that sharp, they're going to slide."
No, that's not what I mean at all. No.
Soaring motion, right?
I mean to get that penetration quickly.
Yeah,
because there's less of it.
Bang, and I don't doubt for it. Like put a hook into something and do it with either or. Under the same weight, the one will go in to the barb faster. I think that's unarguable. The fact that it's thinner and it will happen.
I just think the unknown element is what I mentioned about the once they are pricked and move upwards, that weight coming into play. Whether you're talking like a nanosecond of difference, or whether you're talking about something that is significant. I just don't know how
you can make an argument for how much difference it makes. I don't know, but I've always been in the game of if it makes any difference, I will do it. So, does it really matter? I think yes. Could I ever truly stand there and say, "Well, this is how I know that"? No, I couldn't. But I have never used a sharpened hook since the day I used them first, up until Burfield last year when I felt I had to. I actually used sharpened hooks on there for the majority of the early time I was there, with the crayfish, and loads of times I reeled in with crayed hook baits, perfectly sharp hooks. Also, lots of times I reeled in with hooks that were so burred over, I was adamant that it was the retrieve that's doing it, not the crayfish. I don't think crays cause as much damage to hooks as people think, personally. I got crayed at Waterside last week. My hooks were still fine. So I stopped using them on Burfield because I wasn't willing to risk having hooks that had been blunted by crays out there. As much as I don't really think they do that much damage to them, I don't know for certain. I wouldn't take the risk, and I doubled my lead size in turn. And it was really weird using out of the packet hooks. But since doing that, last time when I went to France the other week, I used out of the packet hooks on a couple of my rods. So, it's one of them. Like, is a hook sharp enough with a big lead without it being sharpened? Yes, it is. Smaller lead sizes, which I have often used, I would not want to use a 2.5 ounce pear lead and an unsharpened hook.
I've got a little anecdote along those lines, because I think maybe part of, actually, you did mention that Lewis was basing this on underwater stuff. Now, I know that Tom Maker has caught an obscene number of carp on one hook during his time in the Fox stable, so maybe Lewis is bearing that in mind as well, and why wouldn't he? But I have a similar anecdote, actually. A friend of mine, he's what you call a traditionalist, cane rod, centre pin. We have been going to an ancient pool in deepest Devon for 20 years, every year, and he blanked for a long time there in the early days because he didn't use a bolt rig, wouldn't use a buoy. And it revolutionised his fishing when I tied him up a simple hair rig, like knotless knot, wide gape, size 8. We use small tigers on the hair usually, or a small 12mm buoy, lead clip and a small lead. Usually, I mean, if he can get away without losing them, he does as well. We're talking 1.5 ounce leads maybe. It's all close in fishing. But he will use the same rig 1 year to the next with a 1.5 ounce lead. And don't get me wrong, he doesn't catch loads and loads, but he catches fairly consistently using the same size 8 wide gape and a 1.5 ounce lead. So, you can get away with it. But then he doesn't catch quite as many as if he changes his rig, I don't think. So,
would you, just finally on that spot that Oscar was fishing in the margins, thousands of roach there, lots of pebbles, a very hard spot if people haven't seen it. It's that typical really hard gravel, loads of roach. Would you have fished a sharpened hook in that situation?
1,000,000%.
Okay.
Without question, yeah. Again, I don't think that... I have these are the same old discussions I have with people, but I don't think that roach blunt your hooks and that. People say they do. Like, of all I've fished loads of lakes over the years. Most of the time they're full of small fish and that, and I never once reel my rigs in and think a roach has blunted the points on them. And I use the sharpest hooks you can use. I've never ever. If anything, I think they're more likely to hook themselves, shake the hook off, and do it that way. But I don't subscribe to this bashing them into the bottom.
No, I think the more you're talking about it, the more I'm thinking. I reel in a sharpened hook sharp more often than I do bird, and I think if it's bird, it's usually because it's hit something on the way in.
Like the trip I did to France, right? So we went to France a couple of weeks ago. I knew from experience that place was teeming with nuisance species. I was having to use huge quantities of bait when I went there previously in order to keep bait on spots. We put underwater cameras in there, and I swear to you, like, if you think you've seen roach, all day, every day, from first light till last light, a swarm of roach.
Can we throw a clip in?
Dropping it down. Yeah, we can throw a clip in. Yeah, I'll get one. These were the biggest stones I've ever fished over. The spots were horrible. They were like boulders, really, really big. They made the stones in Gaz's film look like pea shingle. Horrible spots, really. And these roach just hammered it all day. And they were picking the rig up as well. They were dropping it. They're picking it up. We were retrieving our rig. We never once blunted a hook, reeling them in. Don't know why. I think that's more pot luck than anything. But we were keen to see, and I was particularly keen, to see if the roach had done any damage. They were fine. Everything is so light underwater. How does a roach push, like...
hard enough?
How does a roach push hard? It's not going to. The hook's going to move out of its way. I just, like I say, crayfish, I can make an argument for, because with a hook that's attached to a lead, i.e. fixed in place, if a cray got that the wrong way, moved away with it, and that hook scraped along its body, that could blunt a hook. How often they do that? I don't think it is that often. Can they do it? Yes. So on a lake with crays in, would I genuinely really consider the sharpened hooks? Yeah, I would consider them. not using them. And obviously I have said that I didn't use them at periods. If I fish a lake that had crays in and there were 10 50-pounders in it and I wanted to catch them all the same, there wasn't one particular fish that I thought, then I would just use Sharpened. But when you're talking, do you get one opportunity at one carp, then you're probably safer to go bigger lead, less sharp hook. But yeah, roach, things like that, I don't believe that they come in, headbutt your hook into the floor and blunt it. I don't believe it for a second. I've never seen any evidence of it to be true. And, you know, again, my opinions always are based around...
I'll tell you what, mate, I've caught tench, unhooked them, and the Kamakura's been pin.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I've played it in.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah. I think a lot of people think that that's the case. I think a lot of people think roach stuff, headbutt their hooks and dull the points. But the good thing with a Kamakura is it's either sharp or written off. There is no in between. And, yeah, I think... You know, if we all picked our rigs up off the bottom in a boat, if you rowed out every time and carefully lifted them off the bottom, I think a lot of the time, because I've heard loads of arguments over the years of people saying, my hooks are blunting over gravel. Your hooks aren't blunting over gravel, you're blunting them when you reel them in. And I remember that early days of the Kamakuras and stuff becoming really popular. Lots of people moaning about and blaming the hooks because they're blunted when they've reeled them in and how's that happened. And it's because you're reeling in your lead across the gravel and the
I think
hook
even
gets
weed
caught.
will do it, mate.
Yeah, anything can. If that
pretty
hook point hits something,
yeah.
it's never going to do it a favour.
It's very, very fine,
You know,
isn't it?
the only thing you want a sharpened hook point coming into contact with is a carp's mouth. That's it.
Speaking of carp's mouths, where do we move on to next? We've done Oscar Thornton. What will we see as viewers to Cypography? What's coming up soon?
It's Henry, isn't it? It's going to be the next.
Henry's the next one.
Is that Henry Lennon?
Yeah, but that will be out. So let's look beyond that
Yeah.
because actually that's going to be out, and we'll probably
we'll
cover
talk
that in the
about
next pod. But
Henry's is out probably as people speak.
Yep.
Watch this again, and as I sort of touched on earlier, this is not a big carp film. We were hoping we might see a few big carp, and we did see the occasional one. But this is a really entertaining film for many other ways. There's loads of crazy stuff that happens that you just never would have expected, which is good because we need them all to be different, and it's very different. Beyond that, we've got Tom Stokes and Nigel Sharp. We've got a bit of a combo film coming out. Again, I feel like we should talk more about that later down the line.
you've been to Europe, like Tom mentioned.
Yeah, I've been to Europe, had a really good, really bad trip. So it was parts of it were amazing, parts of it were really, really, really great. Parts of it were really, really, really bad, really frustrating. But will make for entertaining viewing because it doesn't matter how bad a time we have when you watch it, as long as you don't have to experience it happening, it's always funny. But that was a good trip.
We've got pretty, your next two shoots out is two different countries.
Yeah.
It's not England.
It's
Wales, and then it's France, isn't it?
Yeah, it's got 2 weeks at the aquarium in France.
Where's the Welsh one? I really enjoyed Rich's Welsh Odyssey a couple of years ago.
I love fishing in Wales.
Caerphilly.
Yeah.
Caerphilly Castle, yeah.
Oh, I've fished there. Brilliant. But yeah, I
Yeah.
like Caerphilly Castle. And they said the fish are getting bigger in there.
Mate, they're lovely carp as well.
They are.
They're lovely, lovely,
looking
lovely
fish,
carp.
and it's doing quite a few 30s.
Yeah.
I say quite a few, but
It is, mate.
it's
yeah.
not bad for that neck of the woods, is it?
So I can't wait. I'm fishing on that one. So that's and
Do you know what? You are due getting turned over. You've been sitting there smug for too long, mate.
Will you get underwater at Caerphilly?
Yeah, I'm doing the underwater. Yeah, yeah,
I look forward to seeing that.
yeah. So, but I think I'm gonna fish. I think I'm gonna fish with hinges on that one.
No, you've got to put the rig out now.
Done it once though, haven't I?
No, but you haven't been turned over on it yet.
No. So
He's trying to preserve his perfect record.
If I had my way, I'd just fish how I always fish. But I don't know. It's like
You fished hinges for years, mate, so that's
I
fine.
kind of should use the hinge. You know, the combi hinge.
Yeah,
I
the
might-
grey
I
rig.
might
Sorry,
do
the
that.
Cobra rig.
The Cobra
You're going to
rig,
go the Cobra, yeah?
Yeah, the Phil Buckley rig. So I'll use the Phil Buckley rig. I think I need to see the lake. It's very shallow water, and I don't really like fishing pop-ups in shallow water. So that's the one thing that's putting me off doing that. But I think, for the sake of it's always hard. Do you do something for the sake of the film, or do you just do what you think you should do? I don't know how I'll end up fishing the place yet, but I'd like to do something a bit different. But at the same time, I want to catch as many carp out of the lake as possible because they're really, really nice carp. It's a bloody long way from home as well, so
But you don't have to pay the toll anymore, so that's one.
Is there no toll?
I don't think so. I think they've scrapped the toll on.
It's quite funny actually. They wanted us to pay the castle wanted us to pay £21,000. So they've got like a filming rate.
Yeah, it's owned by Cadw, isn't it? The Welsh version of English Heritage. Yeah.
So there's a filming rate they have to go to the castle and film, and I made a bit of an agreement with the club that was I would come down. I went to a junior event in Wales, so I drove up to Wales. When I saw all these young lads, arranged for some quarter end tackle and all that, and they were like, "If you do that, we'll let you come and film." But obviously, because since they realised how in depth what we do is in terms of
boats,
we need to go in the lake, and they were like, "Oh right, okay, so we need to talk to the castle." Normally, the council wouldn't necessarily need to be that involved. So they then came back to me, there's going to be a fee. And I was like, okay, fine. Don't mind paying to go there. That's fine. And then they come back and he was like, I've got a slight problem. They've mentioned a fee of £150 an hour. And I was thinking, right, okay, so how much is that? And when I worked it out, it was like 21,700 quid or something they wanted us to pay. Luckily, we've since gone back to them with revised offers and managed to get it down quite significantly. So that nearly didn't happen, which would have been a massive shame because, like you say, it's a beautiful lake, so different to anywhere else really. Breaking
out the south of England bubble as well, which is always important.
Yeah.
And they're beautiful, beautiful carp. They really are. So I'm really excited for that. There's all sorts going on. And we've got to go.
Well, I think once these shoots are done as well, you're talking about
January.
Yeah, but you're also talking about different content. So underwaters, which are going to feature more angles. So
we're going to diversify what we're doing with underwater, largely based on feedback. So I think a lot will change, and I think they'll be better for it. We'll always change.